On the morning of June 6, 1944, the American invasion of France was dead in the water, literally. The troops on Omaha Beach weren't advancing, they were hiding. Pinned down by a seamless wall of German machine gun fire, they were trapped between the mines, the metal stakes, and the rising tide that threatened to swallow the wounded alive. The first waves had been shattered. Medics were already running out of morphine. Officers were dead or missing. And for thousands of men, the only plan left was survive the next 60 seconds. Far offshore, huge cruisers like Augusta and Tuscaloosa watched the beach through binoculars. They had firepower, enough to level the coastline, but they stayed miles back, adhering to the safety plan that had been written months earlier. That plan made sense on paper. On the real Omaha Beach, it was a death sentence. And that's when one destroyer captain broke the rules. She is 400 yards from the beach. Her keel is scraping sand. Her bow is buried in the surf. And she is the only thing standing between this soldier on the sand and total annihilation. This is the story of the USS Frankford, the ship that charged the beach. To understand why this moment was insane, you have to understand the ship herself. The USS Frankford was a Gleaves-class destroyer, part of a family of vessels sailors affectionately and nervously called the Greyhounds of the Sea. They were fast, maneuverable, and packed with firepower. Frankford carried 5 5-inch guns, torpedoes, depth charges, and anti-aircraft weapons. She could outrun almost anything smaller than a battleship. But she had a glass jaw. Her steel plating was barely thicker than a car's body panel. A single 88mm shell, the kind the Germans used on the cliffs, could punch through her hull like it was wet paper. Her magazines sat just behind that thin membrane. If they detonated, the ship would disappear into a rolling fireball. Destroyer captains were trained to use speed and distance as their armor. Close-range gun duels with fortified positions were not bravery. They were suicide. Yet on D-Day, suicide was exactly what the infantry on Omaha Beach thought they were facing. For 2 years, Frankfurt and her crew had been grinding through the Atlantic War, long nights escorting convoys, silent hunts for U-boats in freezing black water, damp bunks, bad coffee, and endless drills. They were tired, but they were sharp, especially their gunnery crew. Under Lieutenant Commander James Semmes, a man known for aggression and uncanny instincts, Frankfurt had built a reputation for hitting what she aimed at. No one knew it at the time, but every miserable freezing drill in the North Atlantic was preparation for a single hour off the coast of France. The plan for D-Day relied on 2 things: air support and tanks. Both failed. The heavy bombers, afraid of hitting their own men in the morning fog, released their bombs too far inland. The beach defenses, the bunkers, the casemates, the machine guns, were untouched. And the tanks, the secret duplex drive, the floating Shermans that were supposed to arrive alongside the infantry, were launched too far offshore in rough seas. Nearly all of them sank. In some units, 27 of 32 tanks disappeared beneath the waves before they even reached the beach, so the infantry walked into a meat grinder with zero support. The destroyers had a designated fire lane offshore, a place they were supposed to stay. But the sailors called it Dodge City. It was a shooting gallery. The German guns on the bluffs had perfect range. Sitting in the lane meant waiting to die. Semmes realized the truth. The only way to survive was to get closer, get under the German guns, get so close the artillery couldn't depress their barrels enough to hit him. At 0900 hours, a message comes from Admiral Bryant. Get on them, men. Get on them. Most captains closed the distance by a little. Semmes took it literally. Combat veterans on the bridge would later say the moment felt like the air itself changed, like something had cracked open. Semmes ordered the helm to turn hard toward the beach. Officers glanced at each other. This wasn't a course correction. This was a charge. Frankfurt surged toward the shallows. On the beach, a lone tank commander sat trapped in his Sherman. His engine was dead, his hull was half submerged, and a German anti-tank gun had him sighted in. He had no radio, no infantry nearby, no backup. He had seconds. Behind him lay a beach littered with burned tanks and bodies. Ahead of him, the cliffs spat fire. There was nowhere left to go. And then, out of the smoke, he saw a shape moving. Something big, something impossible. The Frankford was closing fast, too fast. Sailors on deck braced for impact. Officers shouted depth readings. The hull scraped sand. Men could feel the vibration through their boots. Another few yards and she would ground herself permanently. But Semmes wasn't aiming to ram the beach. At the last second, he spun the rudder hard over, swinging the destroyer sideways and parking her broadside facing the cliffs. A baseball pitcher could have thrown a ball from the sand and hit her hull. But they had a new problem. Smoke. Too much of it. The gunnery officer, Lieutenant Owen Keeler, reported the rangefinders were blind. They could hear machine gun fire. They could hear shells whistling overhead, but they couldn't see anything. And then he spotted the Sherman. With no radio, the tank commander popped his hatch, exposing himself to gunfire, and squeezed off bursts from his .30 cal machine gun. He wasn't trying to kill anyone. He was pointing. Tracers arced through the smoke toward a bunker hidden in the cliffs. Keeler shouted to the gun crews, "Follow his tracers!" The Frankford fired a 5-inch shell. Boom. Direct hit. The bunker vanished in a plume of concrete dust and smoke. The tank commander gave a quick wave, half salute, half thank God, and swung his turret toward the next target. For the next hour, it was a duet of destruction. The tank pointed, the destroyer fired, the cliff erupted, machine gun nests, mortar pits, anti-tank guns. Positions that had survived bombers and artillery were erased in seconds. The Frankford fired so many shells that hot brass piled ankle-deep, then knee-deep, then waist-deep across the deck. Sailors shoveled casings aside just to keep the guns loading. At one point, Keeler realized they had emptied their magazines. Every high-explosive round, every armor-piercing shell. They had to back off, resupply from other ships, then charge forward again. Nobody told Semmes to do that. He just did. And on Omaha Beach, the impossible finally began to happen. Pinned-down soldiers started to move, first crawls, then dashes, then full sprints. The tide was no longer the enemy. The cliff was no longer invincible, because a thin-skinned destroyer stood between them and death. D-Day made Frankfurt famous, but it didn't end her war. 2 months later, during the invasion of southern France, she fought what some sailors described as the most terrifying night battle they ever witnessed. In pitch-black darkness off Port Crow, Semmes used radar, still a relatively new technology, to ambush a squadron of German ships hiding among the islands. What followed was a chaotic brawl at point-blank range. Muzzle flashes lit up the sea. Shell splashes showered the decks. Frankfurt dueled enemy warships in the dark and lived to tell about it. Semmes earned his second Silver Star. His crew earned a reputation that followed them the rest of their lives. The Frankfurt survived the war, but she couldn't survive the peace. In 1973, she was sunk as a target ship. No ceremony, no speeches, just a final assignment. But her legacy isn't on the ocean floor. It's in the families of the men who walked off Omaha Beach alive because a destroyer, built for speed, not armor, refused to back down. To the Navy, she was hull number 497. To the men on that beach, she was the miracle at the water's edge.